I'm Maryn.
And I'm Christie.
And you're listening to Hung, a true crime podcast where we discuss court cases from the court of law to the court of public opinion. Today is part 3 of our Florida versus Caylee Anthony case. We are just getting into the case put forth by the defense.
That's right. If you guys are still with us, yay! This is a lot longer than we thought it was going to be. I mean, I think it's good stuff, and it does follow along with the way that the case progressed versus just what people thought about the story or what was happening.
And I think it goes a long way towards helping us to understand how it is that the jury got to the decision that they made, or even more perplexing, now we see exactly what they saw and they still made the decision they made.
Right.
Because that's just one of the biggest question marks about this whole case.
Yeah, it is really interesting seeing the case from this perspective. I'm really enjoying it because it does build and it's not so easy and accessible like the way that we are used to consuming these stories.
I mean, 6 weeks of testimony, that's a lot to watch and take notes on and look at.
So this is your Caylee Anthony Cliff Notes version if you don't want to watch the trial yourself. We're going to move on to the defense's forensic entomologist, their bug guy. Interestingly enough, he was trained by the other bug guy.
Oh, by the prosecution's bug guy.
Yep. So he was trained by the prosecution's bug guy, and the prosecution's bug guy, let's say if he's been doing it for 20 years or something, and this guy has been doing it for 4 or 6 or something. You know, he's very, very short, less than 10 for sure, years at this point. That's not to say he doesn't have knowledge and experience or whatever, but teacher, student, a lot of experience, less experience, that means something. But then what's coming to mind for me is Dr. Spitz, and he's like 90 years old, and there's a problem with that. So Dr. Huntington, and I have to say too about the hair study that the prosecution did, and they were like, what state were you in when you did that study? What was the temperature outside, and what time of year was it? That wasn't like Florida, right? So they're doing that. And then they come to their guy.
The defense is doing that?
Yeah, the defense is doing that to the prosecution witnesses. Like I said about the whole, you started this study after, you know, like, but then they're doing the same thing. So here they come to their bug guy, and he does this study, also started after the case has gone on, and also in a different state than Florida at much cooler temperatures. So why are you bringing that up with the other guys if it also applies to your guys? It just makes you look bad, right, in the end. Because you might be thinking, oh, he has a point. And then you're also thinking, oh, wait, he had a point. So how seriously can I take this from your guy if that's actually true, right? But I will say that this testimony right here, first time that I had significant, like, reasonable doubt that am I going to have to go with an acquittal?
Makes sense in a way. I mean, everything that's been presented so far, yes, the defense has been able to question them, but everyone has been
the prosecution's witnesses.
Right, exactly. It makes sense why most of what was said during the prosecution's turn was not making you think that maybe, and it could be maybe something that the defense questions that maybe you're like, yeah, wait, that doesn't make sense. But this is like the defense's version.
Yeah. This was the turning point for me of like, oh gosh, this is strong, reasonable doubt. I'm really going to have to process this. But Dr. Huntington had done a study with pig carcasses placed in the trunks of cars, looking at can bugs still get in there if there's a dead body in there. And so he showed what those carcasses looked like after a period of time in the trunk of the car, and the carpet and stuff was just nasty and gross. There's no way that there was a body in this trunk and it looked like this, that you would see something a lot more than that. That was pretty strong, like seeing the pictures of that.
Were any of these put in garbage bags and like
no?
Well, as far as liquid coming out, well, that's contained.
Yeah.
Sealed up, so.
Yes, so the one thing is that if this had been a prosecution witness, the defense attorney would have brought up, and the prosecution did, but were there any Pontiac Sunfires, the make and model of the car that Casey had, that were part of the study? The answer is no, there were not. And the prosecution threw a little pig in a blanket joke. Was the pig wrapped in a blanket and put into 2 garbage bags and put into a laundry hamper before put in the trunk of the car? No, it was not. And the length of time that these pigs were left in the trunk of the car was much longer than 1 to 2 days. So I thought, if you're going to go to all this trouble, why aren't you looking at an actual Pontiac Sunfire? Why aren't you replicating the conditions of this case? And of course they say, well, because we weren't doing it for this case. Right. Just like, of course you did this root banding study for this case. And they're like, well, yeah, it was a motivator, but this was a study we wanted to do anyway. Right. Yeah. So I think that was true for both of them. Right.
Also, to me, that's not really that significant. There's a case, you want some good information about it. You're like, hey, let's recreate this so we can have some good information. That is not crazy to me. That doesn't seem like, ooh, that's self-interest. I'm like,
right. I mean, to me, that's kind of like accident reconstruction. Hey, what's wrong with saying, well, what happens? Is this reasonable? To me, it makes perfect sense, So I didn't have a problem with him doing this study. I thought it was actually interesting and helpful. I thought, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe there couldn't have been a body in the back of the car until, what you said about length of time and all the other stuff that I was like, okay, that doesn't really, yeah, 2 days. I'm like, what did it look like at 2 days? We don't have anything that said that. But the other thing was when they said, okay, but it was somewhere that bugs didn't get in there, right? So it's like you're saying, oh, bugs will get in anywhere. They're going to get in no matter what you do with it. They're going to find a way in because they're persistent like that. Okay, but they didn't get in this case, so it was somewhere that they couldn't get to, and he believed, well, I think they probably did actually get to it, but, so where's the evidence of it? Oh, someone probably just washed that off before they put it in the woods.
You would think that if that was possible, then that wouldn't be a good gauge of evidence anyway, because rain, Florida's really rainy.
Right.
Oh, if you'd said maybe it washed off in the rain, okay, maybe, but somebody washed the body. And first of all, they're still looking for that evidence. They're not worried about, oh, what if the rain washed it away? They're like, no, that evidence would be there.
It was strong for me until that point, and I went, if that's your explanation, that does not sound reasonable to me at all. That's not to say I immediately discounted everything that he said. I still felt like, okay, this is something I really have to sit with and think about. It was really effective testimony, and I thought he actually did present pretty well, and probably the fact that he's younger and more dynamic and pictures and whatever, he showed better than his old teacher that was talking, because
did a better performance.
Yeah, exactly. It was impactful for me. I would imagine it was impactful on the jury that's looking at these pictures and hearing this and like, whoa, But I hope they were also like, what? When he said, oh, probably someone just washed it off before they put it on there. It's like, okay, get real. Come on. And then put it in garbage bag. It's like, I don't know, whatever. And they did a really, really good job cleaning it off. Dr. Spitz was the other one. He's a medical examiner, and he has worked on a lot of high-profile cases. So you want to, throw dirt in the face of Dr. Voss because of a sniffer machine that he's developed? What about Dr. Spitz, who's charging people and testifying in all these high-profile cases and saying the most bizarre things that just fit exactly what you want him to say? Sorry. They're going on and on about all his credentials and stuff, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be pretty weighty testimony. He's been doing this a long time, so I certainly was not writing him off because he's, really old. But hey, that's could work in his favor. He's got a lot of experience, right? I was all ready to listen to him, and he was so strange, and the defense would ask a question and he would just meander all over the place and all sorts of stuff. The prosecution was constantly calling objection for non-responsive, that he wasn't actually answering the question asked. And so it was, so his big thing that came out with the defense questioning was that the state's medical examiner did not complete the exam. They didn't do a thorough job because everyone knows that you cut the top of the skull off and you open up the skull to do your examination. And they didn't do that. So that was improper on their part. And that shows that you are incompetent, basically. Then when he got the remains, he did finish the exam and he cut open the skull and he looked inside and said, oh, there was sediment, this particular kind of sediment of decomposition that is sticky. As it deteriorates, it leaves residue on whatever was close to the ground. That tells me that the skull was on its left side when it was decomposing.
Okay.
And because when the skull was found, it was found actually like the head upside down, I think, or at least tipped back or something. They didn't show us the pictures of the skull either, so, we just heard descriptions, so a little bit hard to know exactly what it looked like. So that was evidence. So somebody took the skull at some point and put the skull back because it was not in the same position that it decomposed in or whatever. So the weird part is when the prosecution was cross-examining him and was asking him, okay, well, where's this protocol? It says you have to cut open the skull. He couldn't find any, but he was insistent, but I know because I've been doing this forever that this is the way that you're supposed to do it, and asked if he'd had any of that sediment tested to show that it was decomposition. And, well, I don't have a lab. I don't, whatever. So he hadn't really done. But I know, I can tell. I have seen this and I know what it looks like and I can tell you 100% that's what it was. Okay. And then, okay, so what about the duct tape that was on the face? Well, we're not sure exactly where it was, And his whole theory, which just is so bizarre, is that someone came and picked up the skull and the jawbone, put them together in anatomical position, and then put duct tape across it so that it would hold the jaw onto the skull. The defense is saying that someone had taken the remains, they were somewhere else for all this time, but the body wasn't there, and then it was there. But every witness has said once the body was there a couple days after death, it did not move again. It was there. It decomposed there. Nobody took it anywhere except for this one outlier that says the skull itself was taken. The prosecution pointed out the duct tape was not attached to the bone. It was attached to the hair. And Dr. Spitz said, well, I'm not even sure it was really attached to the hair. I don't know that it was really sticky at all anymore, that it could really stick to anything. So then that's also like, well, if it was sitting inside a house, how does it lose its stickiness? If it's not sitting inside a house, then that fits more with the prosecution's story, but it's still not stuck to the bone. It's stuck to the hair. And they said, well, did you read the medical examiner's report? Oh, yes, I read all of that stuff. Well, did you notice that they actually had to cut the hair to get the tape out of it? So it was still stuck to the hair. And the other thing that he said was, so the prosecution brought up that the hair created that kind of nest that we talked about before that indicates that the body was on its back. And the hair slid down the skull and then was like a halo around the head. And if they had been on their side, that hair would have slid off to one side. And Dr. Spitz even said, oh, well, the hair that was on the upper facing part of the head wouldn't have slid down at all. It would still be stuck there. And that adipocere, that soapy substance, oh, well, that kind of makes it stick onto the skull too. So, but there was no hair stuck on the skull. So that doesn't really fit. And then they said, okay, well, what about this? There was hair that was draped across in this certain way over the skull. How do you explain that? That doesn't fit with her being on her left side. And he said, oh, well, somebody staged it like that before they took the picture. Why? I mean, how many weird things have to have taken place to fit the defense's story? So, yeah, that was strange. And I just couldn't really take anything he said seriously because nothing he said was additive. The only things that he said is the position of the skull when it was decomposing was on its left side. And the reason the hair didn't match is because someone staged it, but the hair would have still been stuck to the skull. But the skull was picked up and somebody put the tape on it to hold it on, but then it wasn't actually on found the bone anymore. I mean, it just was a mess all over the place. Mm-hmm. There was nothing besides did they do a shoddy examination, and basically what the medical examiner already said is that we don't know the means. We can't show exactly how she died. However, the manner of death, because of all these circumstances, clearly homicide. Yep. And he was like, well, that's not the way you do it. And the prosecution said, well, what did you look at? What information did you have about the case? Well, I didn't even need to know about, I don't know. It's just weird. It did not seem like a real serious examination of the evidence and the police reports and all of that. You don't just look at especially a skeletonized body and decide what happened. You have to take everything into account. And he only took into account what the defense wanted him to say.
Right. Exactly.
Except they probably didn't say a whole bunch of crazy stuff that makes no sense.
Please try not to actually answer the questions that we give you. So is this guy or another guy that thinks the duct tape came from the outside of the bag? Because I've heard different people talking about, I think even specifically talking about Dr. Spitz, so that they've been like, well, he claims that it was on the outside of the bag and somehow migrated onto her face.
I have listened to all of his testimony again today, and he said so many bizarre things that he may have said something like that.
Maybe, but if he's already saying, well, it was put on the skull afterwards, then it wouldn't really make sense for him to say that it was on the bag. Then why are you saying both?
Okay, so I thought that it was the forensic anthropologist that testified first in this case, but it actually wasn't. It was actually a string of analysts that they pulled in that I felt like weren't super consequential, and so they just were in and out, and then it went to the forensic anthropologist, and that's the one that really stuck out in my mind. But I do want to just review these other witnesses that they put on the stand. Most of these were people that they'd already called during the prosecution's trial, but then there were a few that they hadn't called. So one was Gerardo Bloise, who is a CSI tech, and he just talked about inspecting Tony's car and that there was some staining identified in the trunk. They performed a presumptive test for blood, which was negative. They didn't do anything more with that. There was nothing in his car that looked suspicious at all. And then he also asked him about one of the search warrants that he executed on the Anthony home. He said they did a visual inspection of the house and the garage, like the rooms and stuff there, but their main focus was on Casey's room and going through all of her clothing, looking for stains. They did actually find the pair of pants that people said she was wearing on June 16th, and they did test those pants like just under an alternate light source, and there was no staining at all, so there were no other testing that they could do on those. And they did find some stains on a few other pieces of clothing that they did send to the FBI lab for further testing. And the defense just wanted it pointed out that they weren't looking at anyone else's clothes, i.e. George,
Right.
So did you check George's clothes and see if there was any blood or anything on those? And the answer was no. They didn't check anyone else's stuff. So it was really focused on Casey, which I guess that's part of their whole thing, as the investigation from the start was focused on Casey and Casey only, which I wonder why. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yes, but if Casey had gone with this story while she was in custody, then maybe they would have looked at other avenues too. Because it's not like they said, your story seems improbable about Zanny, and then didn't do any investigation. Right. They tried to find people with that name. They brought people in and talked to them. So if she had said, okay, actually it was my dad, they would have looked more into George's stuff. So it's not really just a case of them zeroing in and ignoring all other signs. There was no signs that they saw that they should suspect George, and Casey never gave any indication that they should.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this is only 1 week after the initial police report, too. So this is very early on in the investigation. And so, of course, they're looking at her. She's the last one to have been with Caylee, and no one else has seen her since. And so they are looking specifically at her to see, is there something that we can see that maybe there's a different story here? And at that point, they didn't find anything.
I mean, if cadaver dogs indicated on George's car, they didn't. So everything, all the evidence is, the little that there is pointing to Casey. It's actually hard to believe that a mother would kill her child. So it's not the same as a wife dies and it's always the husband, you know.
I'm sure it's in the back of their mind, but there's so many avenues of investigation right now that they're looking into that's not what they're focused on initially, though they've got to know from their experience in law enforcement that family members usually are the ones who kill family members. So, you know, I'm sure they have that in mind, but that wasn't their primary focus. They were focusing on trying to find her and trying to follow the other leads that they had been given.
Well, and another thing that just points to Casey for them is the fact that she did give such obvious lies. And so it's like, who lies? The innocent person or a guilty person?
Right. Yeah, exactly. What is she trying to cover up is kind of the question you have to ask yourself. I thought it was interesting, the prosecution, when he stood up to cross-examine Gerardo Bloise, he only asked one question related to Tony's car. Why didn't they do more investigation on Tony's car? Did it smell like it had a dead body in it? No? Okay. Well, then we're done here, right?
I mean, they did preliminary testing. Nothing seems suspicious. All right, moving on.
Right. So the next witness that they called was Heather Subert. She was a FBI DNA analyst. So all those clothes that Gerardo Bloise had just talked about them taking into evidence and submitting to the FBI lab, she's the one that received those. And so she's going through all of those clothes and the testing. And so she also got the swabs from the spare tire cover and the carpet from the back of the trunk. But she did say because there were no stains observed on those pants that Casey was wearing on the 16th, no further testing was done on those. And the other ones that they tested were either they didn't see any stains noted, or if they did note stains, the test for blood was negative. So nothing came of her clothes at all. And then the swabs from the spare tire cover, the presumptive test was negative for blood, and the carpet with the stain also negative for blood. She also had the neighbor's shovel to check for any blood or, you know, stains or anything like that. They did see some stains on there. They tested it negative for blood. They did some DNA testing on the shovel as well. And there was DNA there, but it was just not enough to generate any sort of profile. Yeah. But it was a female on the shovel.
That's interesting. I feel like all of this stuff kind of came up with nothing. The defense calls them up, be like, hey, basically to show
they didn't find anything.
They didn't find anything.
Right.
And they only were focusing on Casey. And then also I thought with like the blood in the manner of death that is proposed, there really wouldn't be blood. So
yep. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think the same thing, though I also can see why that could mean something too, right? Like in this case, you bring up, well, because of the other pieces that we do have of the scene, that's not what they're thinking. They're not expecting that they would find blood. But, you know, it is important to, you know, it's like, okay, well, it wasn't that, right? We're not seeing that. So important.
You definitely should still test for that. But like you shouldn't give that much importance to the fact that you didn't find blood because...
Right. Because not every murder involves blood.
Right. So you strangle somebody, they're not going to bleed.
Yeah. The other things that she tested were the duct tape from the scene, the shorts from the scene, the collar of Caylee's shirt that she was wearing, the shorts, the shirt, those were also both negative for blood and semen. The duct tape, she tested both sides of the duct tape. So the non-sticky side of the tape did have a little bit of DNA on it. And they could rule out the contributor of that DNA being Casey or Caylee or George, Cindy, Lee. So all the family members, they ruled out as being the source of that DNA. So the next step was they looked at all the people who had handled that evidence. And it was determined that one of the people who had handled that in the documents section or whatever, that there was a little bit of DNA on there, but they were able to show that, okay, that DNA came from her. There was no other DNA on that non-adhesive side of the tape.
It's a good thing that they were able to find who it was from, and that the defense couldn't go into this. So it could have been somebody stole her, some third party.
Right. Well, or that it really was another person that did it, not Casey, right?
Right. That's what I'm
so
saying.
Either it's a misdirection where it was not the person that did anything to Caylee, but you can misdirect, or it really was someone else that did something to Caylee, but that was shown that was not the case, that it was one of the examiners. And then they looked at the adhesive side of the tape, which, of course, you know, if it's stuck to the face or skin at all, there's a higher chance that you might find some sort of DNA on that adhesive as opposed to that shiny non-adhesive side. However, they only found a single peak at the D3 marker. So when they run these tests, they're looking to see how much DNA is showing up, and they have different markers that they're looking at, and each one of those kind of has a different gene or allele associated with it. So they can pick out who's that could or couldn't be based on what they're seeing there. Well, there was only one peak, which meant only one allele was showing anything. And normally, well, there are two options. You get DNA from your mom and from your dad. If they have different alleles, then you get one from each, and you would have two peaks there, as the one that you got from your mom, the one you got from your dad. But if you got the same one from both parents, they both happen to have that same gene, that same allele, then it just would be one. This likely is someone that had maybe just that one allele, but there was such small numbers, so it's hard to know, but no other peaks were detected, so they could only see one, which was just not a whole lot of information. But that marker was a 17 at that location, and none of the family were 17s, so it wasn't them. And they didn't say was that examiner who contaminated the front side of the tape, does she have a 17? Could that just be her on the back side of the tape too? Later in the cross-examination by the prosecution, it did kind of sound like there were examiners that it could have applied to. So most likely that is what it was. It was just contamination. But the defense really wanted to focus on, hey, if it was really stuck on someone's skin, wouldn't you expect to see the DNA there? And they kind of go into this again in one of their witnesses coming up, so I'll talk about it more there. And then also the spare tire cover being negative for blood, this idea of, well, but if it was decomposition fluid, wouldn't it have been testing positive somehow? What she said was, it's really only for blood, so it's looking at the iron in blood. And so once that iron has broken down, the cells are no longer intact and it degrades, it's not going to test positive anymore. So we really can't say one way or another whether it was decomposition fluid or was not decomposition fluid. The only thing that I can say is that it's not reacting to the test for blood. She did say if we'd seen like a red stain like blood, we would expect that we would get something from there, but that's not the type of stain that it was. She did say, I wouldn't really expect to see DNA on the duct tape. If it was going to be there, more likely on the sticky side. However, rain, sun, heat, time, all of these things that not surprising to her that they didn't find any DNA there.
Right. So, even if it had been attached to skin.
Exactly. That was her testimony. So again, kind of a whole lot of nothing. It did come up, though, that the defense asked, did somebody ask you to do a paternity test on Lee to see if he could be the father? And boop, the prosecution was not having that. Objection. So they went to a sidebar and did some talking. And then when they came back, it was, when you're running all of these tests, if you compare one person and another person, you can tell whether or not someone could be a relative, a parent, right? Based on, I think Caylee was like a 14, 15 at one spot, right? So if Lee doesn't have a 14 or a 15, he cannot be the contributor. It has to be a different person. So she would have gotten the 14 or 15 from Casey, and she would have gotten the other one from somebody else. And if Lee doesn't have that, it couldn't be him. So, it's like, well, just because somebody had the idea that why don't we look at it does not mean like the investigators suspected that it really could be him. Somebody just decided they were going to look at it. Is kind of how it was presented. The defense did say in their opening statement, even to the extent that they had a paternity test on Lee, which was a little misleading because it really wasn't a paternity test, but it was determined that he could not be the father of Caylee. So then we had an almost nothing, few minutes on the stand. One of the CSI techs who there was impression of a heart sticker on the tape. And then after further testing was done, then they couldn't see the impression anymore. But they did find a heart sticker at the crime scene. And so they were presenting that. But because they had no real evidence of it actually being there or what size and shape the heart was, I don't know that it was super important evidence.
Well, it's because then the prosecution goes back and says that they found a sheet of heart stickers in
that they didn't necessarily match that one that was found at the scene either. And
had some
doesn't have heart stickers. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a hard thing to find in someone's house that you're going to have, especially with kids. And back in those days, all the scrapbooking and stuff people did. So
it would be compelling if they found a sheet of stickers and
it matched that one.
This is the exact one that we found at the crime scene. And look, the one next to it is gone, which would be the same one,
Right. And if they actually had that adhesive residue from the sticker that the text says she saw initially but did not take a picture of at the time, if they had that and they could show that that sticker was the same size and fit there, okay, then maybe it means something, right? But without all of those things, I think it's pretty weak evidence. It doesn't necessarily do much. And I do think it's maybe slightly prejudicial. Just stirs some emotion in the jury, but it doesn't actually give you much information. He just wanted to know, where was the heart sticker that was found at the scene? How far away was that from the skull? And it was like 45 feet from baseline or whatever. So it was not super close to the skull. And so again, I'm like, I don't think it's something that you really take into account when you're making your decision as far as guilty or innocent. Oh, she said, okay, so she's had these lane 6, such and such row or whatever. Then the next person came in and he had the exact, like, from the skull to the sticker was actually about 30 feet to the center of that L6 where it was found. So again, okay, the
Not
sticker,
much of a difference.
30 feet away. And then we had another CSI tech. She was actually the one who kind of documented the scene and would take the pictures and stuff. She wasn't collecting the stuff. She was more documenting. So that was Jennifer Welch, and she got up so many times. They were calling her up there. The defense wanted to bring out, like, there's all this garbage here, showing her these pictures. Did you find this? Did you find this? Lots of beer bottles, Gatorade bottles, aluminum cans, things like that, and other just trash.
So they talk about the Gatorade bottle with the syringe in it. Do they talk about that?
That they talked about as being in the garbage that was in her trunk, but not the garbage here. But there was a Gatorade bottle in the Disney bag that was found right next to her body. So there was a Gatorade bottle in that. And asking, well, did you send this for testing? No. And so just showing all the stuff that you didn't test this and you didn't test that. And isn't there lots of stuff around here? And I think they were so focused on this sticker being nothing, which I think we already were like, yeah, we get it. It's really not a big deal. But they kind of opened themselves up for the prosecution getting up and saying, so would it be fair to characterize the area where Caylee's body was found as a trash dump? Yes, it would. Which that is kind of You threw your child away like trash in a place where everyone throws their garbage. So it kind of
was trash probably already around. Like,
yes, exactly. So it's like, that's how important she is to you. And I kind of thought, that was a loss for the defense. What they were getting out of that testimony was so minimal, and it kind of came back to sting them a little bit, in my opinion. So then the next one was actually this question documents examiner, the one who had contaminated the 3 pieces of duct tape. And they started out by asking her about, so when you inspected the duct tape, because they sent it to her to see if she could see the outline of the heart sticker, all this stuff is like the heart sticker. They're like so focused on the stupid heart sticker. And I want to stand up and say, okay, I get it. The heart sticker is inconsequential. Please move on. Let's get to something else. But she says, yeah, I couldn't see anything. I couldn't find any residue or anything there. And then, of course, it's, and so, you contaminated that duct tape. How do you think you did that? Pretty sucky for her. Yeah, that was her. And so it's like, she said, I have no idea. I don't know. I wore gloves. I did all the things that I should do. But, it
obviously happened because there was the DNA. So.
Yeah. And then he also asked about doing a comparison of the garbage bags from the house and the garbage bags from the site. And that, quote, unable to match them to the ones in the house. But when they came on for cross-examination, it was clarified that when it comes to the match, one aspect of the match she's looking at is the tear, right, where it comes apart, and not necessarily the plastic tearing, but also artifacts that you might see extending from one bag into the next bag. So, fiber of this or discoloration strand that goes through the roll.
Obviously, the ones used right after are not there
anymore. They weren't the ones next to. We can say that, but in visual appearance, they were the same. So that does make sense. Yeah, so it was kind of inconclusive that way. They couldn't rule out them coming from that, but they also couldn't say for sure that they did because they couldn't match up the bags right next to it on the roll. So
could they say that they're the same brand, they're the same kind of garbage bag?
They didn't talk about that at all. I mean, they were all black garbage bags with the yellow drawstring tie. So they looked the same, but that's as far as they got. They weren't able to conclusively say more than that.
I mean, it's hard. They're also like torn up and the elements. And so, confidently you can say, yep, they're both black with yellow tabs.
Yep, and then the last one that they called before the forensic entomologist, they called another FBI trace evidence witness that had inspected these stickers on the shovel, because stickers are a great place to find hair and fibers, and he's in the trace evidence.
Like the label stickers and stuff on it.
That are on the...
Like, it was covered in heart stickers.
Or on the handle of the shovel or whatever. Like, I wonder. Okay. That was good, Maryn. That was good. So they did find there was a sticker on the handle of the shovel, and they found a 1/4-inch piece of hair that was Caucasian, but it was this little fragment, and there wasn't enough hair there to be able to compare to any other hair samples. And they did submit it for further testing, but that's all he could say about it at that point. They tried to talk to him about the difference in like the accreditation process and how the FBI lab, they have all these procedures, because they're really trying to compare the difference between the FBI and forensic labs to this research lab that Dr. Voss and these other scientists were there, and like, you guys do all these special things, and you do, you're set up. Yes, exactly, trying to discredit that, but that kind of got shut down, so they didn't get far on that at all. And then we're right back to Jennifer Welch, who is the CSI that's documenting the scene. She's back out there and talking about them clearing the brush and the vegetation and stuff when they found the body, because it was tons of small little saplings, vines, all of this stuff growing up that they just couldn't even really get in there to assess things and gather evidence. And then the defense also asked about the log that was right by the skull, and they had moved that log out of the way after documenting it so that they could have access to where the bones and stuff were. So it was all to set up for their forensic botanist, Dr. Jane Bach, who was about as effective for me as Dr. Spitz, because just, I don't know, kind of ridiculous.
She's the one who says, like, well, the plants could have grown in 2 weeks.
Right. She said that, and it was also strange because they showed this picture of the site when they'd already taken all the leaf litter out. So you see like these little stumps throughout, and then the big trees that are still there, and mossy root growth on the ground, but there's almost no leaves on there whatsoever. And she says, well, looking at this, and this has been about 6 weeks since it was cleaned out, and, I'm looking at how much leaf litter there is on there since that time, so I'm using that to kind of judge how thick the leaves would have been after 2 weeks. But you're looking at that picture, and there is not a lot of leaf litter. I don't know what she's talking about. So it's weird when you're seeing this, and it's a disconnect for me, saying, I really don't understand what you're talking about, because clearly there's not a lot of leaves there. Then when the prosecution was cross-examining and saying there was leaf litter covering the jaw all the way up to the bottom of the orbits, the eye socket, there was nowhere near enough leaf litter on the ground in that 6-week period to have done that. And they're asking, well, so does this look the same to you? Does this look like it's as much? Oh, yeah, in some places. Okay, but here,
so she's saying that the leaves were that deep?
Yes, she's saying that. And also he said, well, here, like, there are places where there are more leaves and there are places that are bare. Maybe, there's wind, right? And so would you say that in the scene before the vegetation was all pulled away, that there's less wind able to blow leaves in there? No, wind could blow leaves in there too. It was just like, I don't know. It just was weird. Similar to Dr. Spitz, I felt like there was a narrative that they were trying to tell. And anything that seemed to not fit in that narrative, they would just say, oh, no, and make it like, yes, that could happen, and no, that couldn't happen, in ways that a layperson can look at it and say, that doesn't make sense. And so it kind of discredits their testimony when you hear them saying things that are kind of ridiculous. And how do you trust anything else that they're saying? Because, because he was like, well, look at this picture of the crime scene right there by the skull. You can see all these different kinds of leaves. You can see some that are green, some that are yellow, some that are brown, some that are gray, some that clearly they've been there for a while. And but green leaves could have fallen off the tree, and also yellow ones and brown ones too. So maybe they all fell off at the same time. We all have seen leaves that have been on the ground for a while and they're decaying. We know what that looks like. So yes, could a yellow and a green leaf have fallen from the tree? Sure. But you can't tell me that these degraded, decaying leaves were hanging on the tree and all of this leaf litter just fell at one time and made this pile.
And to conveniently fit the story you want to tell.
Yes, exactly. I couldn't really take anything that she was saying seriously, especially when you consider that all of the forensic anthropologists, the forensic entomologists, they're all saying that body was there from a couple days after death, and it never moved again. The only thing she's trying to get at is maybe the skull was picked up and moved and put back, but then she's testifying as if it applies to everything else, and we all know it doesn't. And so it's just kind of weird. I think they should have just left her out.
Yeah.
We have Richard Eichenboom, a touch DNA specialist. Basically, they used him to just say, well, there's more sensitive testing that could have been done on the tape, that with this contamination that was on the tape, that maybe that contamination is masking someone else's DNA that's on the tape.
Okay.
And so it could actually be there. And if we have this other special, more sensitive test done on the tape, that we might be able to find this missing, mysterious, masked person that, is on the tape. The prosecution's like, well, did you ask to have that tape tested? Did you see if that could be done or whatever? The tape was never tested by anyone else, and it was also brought out that it's not going to cover a full profile. What it might cover is if, let's say, there's a contamination that has a 17 peak, and there's also a killer that has a 17 peak. And then you may think it's just one person, but maybe it's two. Right?
Okay.
But if you have these 9 or 13 locations, unless they're the same person, it's not going to mask.
Right.
You're not, because if it does mask every single one, then that means your DNA matches every single one. And so that's not masking, right? So it's like, it's not going to cover something that exists that's at a different location. It's only going to, maybe confuse things if someone shares the same one. So not really much came of that either. Well, maybe the tape could be tested, but it also seemed like probably there's no DNA there. Anyway, he was the other one that talked about, like, yeah, on the adhesive side, you might expect to see DNA. However, if the body's decaying, it's on a decomposing body, the flesh is decaying, well, all that DNA is decaying too. And so not surprising to not find DNA there, though there's always a chance that maybe you could. That would be the most likely place to find it. But it was in such bad condition. It's not really surprising that there wasn't DNA there. So we have Detective Yuri Melich, and he asked him, so when you went and did search warrants, did you find any chemistry kits or any chloroform or anything in there? And he said,
bleach
no.
or vinegar or acetone,
rubbing alcohol, right? So now we all know that actually doesn't really matter. We don't really need a kit. In fact, yeah.
Did you find a secret
really don't
laboratory?
Right?
Yeah, she's cooking up chloroform. No.
Right. Yeah, so... But in redirect, he said, well, when these earlier searches were being done, we were still looking for a live child. So even though we found high amounts of chloroform in the trunk, we really weren't focused on looking for those specific items yet, which was another little bit of a burn on them, kind of. Yeah, we still thought she was alive, but oh no, she was dead. So then we started paying a little bit more attention to that stuff. They had another chemist, research scientist that was involved with Dr. Voss in the testing of the air samples and stuff, and kind of brought him in to say, we couldn't do a quantitative analysis, which we already knew that. Oh, look, here's your bench notes, and you wrote down things about how there was something a little wonky about your test, and you found, oh yeah, I had to change this little setting or whatever. Basically comparing to the way that the forensic lab does it, and you probably messed up these tests. And also really pushed him on, is Dr. Voss a chemist? No, he's not a chemist? Okay, then we can't really trust anything he says. When he's like, well, we all work together. He has been working on chemistry-related things, is very knowledgeable. Does he have a degree in chemistry? No, but he's been doing this for 30 years. We're working together. I trust his findings, but he's like, yeah, but you guys are good friends, so he kind of was trying to discredit Dr. Voss through Dr. Wise, but then at the end, he also brought out royalties for the sale of the sniffer machine thing, and he again was like, I mean, none of us are really focused on that. Sure, maybe there's a small royalty if someone buys it, but we already talked about if it's the government or whatever, they don't get any money for it anyway. But he did verify that the fumes that were coming directly from the carpet that they put in a bag and they kind of let it off gas, and then they tested that air, that they found lots of chloroform in there. We had Maryn Bottrell. She's a FBI analyst that she's looking at soil samples and stuff. And basically, they took a bunch of shoes of Casey's. She said a lot of them, they were clean. They looked like some of them may have never been worn. No soil on them to be tested, so they couldn't really do anything with those. There were 3 pairs of shoes that did have some soil on them, so they could test those. And there was also debris that they collected from the car itself, and so they were looking at that and comparing it to the crime scene. And she said, really, there wasn't enough to be able to determine, and the absence of soil on a shoe is insignificant. when determining someone's presence or absence at a location. But if it is a match, that's meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Just said, you can walk around in mud and then you can walk around somewhere else and pick up other soil and then you can walk around somewhere else. And so you can't really say conclusively unless you're under very specific circumstances. She said there wasn't enough debris in the car to really be able to tell, though there was one specific leaf that they wanted to bring up with the botanist, that leaf was found in the car, but there was not one tree of that kind around where Caylee's body was found.
So she couldn't have gone anywhere else.
Nope.
Yeah.
Never. She vacuumed the car before she dumped the body, and then she vacuumed the car again after she dumped the body, and then she put some leaves in there.
Yeah,
clearly.
She wanted to take a keepsake.
Yes. They called another chemist. He was a local chemist. So Dr. Voss was not available. He was out of town right when they first contacted him about these air samples. And so he said, hey, call this guy. He's in the area. He can collect some of those samples until I'm available. So he did go out and he pulled some syringes of air. He didn't have really as good a testing methods. He went back and he tested that and it was just too low levels. He couldn't really get anything from it. So he went back and he did these other fibers that he put in the trunk, and they sat in there and kind of collect some stuff, and he tested those. And he did find 3 substances on there, one of which was chloroform. And then the 3 substances are all reported by Dr. Voss as being products of decomposition in an anaerobic, so a condition where the body's decomposing when there's no oxygen. There's another scientist in Greece who also did a study, and his study did not include the other 2, but his study was conducted under aerobic conditions where there was air present. So you produce different chemicals during breakdown depending on what bacteria are active. And when you consider if a girl is in a garbage bag, 2 garbage bags, and it's taped closed, it's closed all up, well, which of the decomposition processes is going on? With air or without air? Without air. Right. So you would, that's consistent with her
decomposing without.
Yeah. Being kind of sealed up somehow.
It's also interesting to me and significant that they found evidence of chloroform first and then found searches.
Yeah.
Rather than, we found these searches for chloroform. Let's look specifically for chloroform. Right. They found the chloroform, and because they found the chloroform, they're like, hey, did she search chloroform? Looks like she did. A lot. How to make it.
Right.
Yeah.
Strange.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he did say that these 2 other compounds can be found, or the dimethyl disulfide can be found in onions, cabbage, soil, along with decomposition events. They also brought out, what about chlorine from a pool? If they threw a wet bathing suit in the back of the trunk, could that combine with something and could it have created the chloroform? He said, well, yes, it can create chloroform, but it would also create these other products, and those products were not present. So in his mind, we would have seen other things present in the testing that were not present. And the biggest thing that he found in his air samples was gasoline fumes, which makes sense. During cross, the prosecutor brought up that when he was doing his testing, the spare tire cover had already been removed from the trunk, and the carpet had already been removed from the trunk. So it was just the metal trunk. And so he's just testing that and wasn't surprised to get elements of gas, from the trunk of the car. When the defense came back up and did a redirect, they said, so only one of those air samples then had chloroform, right? And he was like, well, no, actually, all these samples had chloroform in them. It's just mostly we found gas. So that kind of backfired on him too, where they wanted to kind of say, well, only one time did you find that, so there couldn't have been that much. And he's like, well, actually, we did find it all of these other times. He's all, oops, okay.
Well, bye.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks, but no thanks. But then the prosecution did bring out from him that using the triple sorbent traps that Dr. Voss used, that's the best way to capture what was really in the air, because it draws the air through that filter and it traps the molecules there, and then they can test that. And he also had the carpet sample itself that they put in the bag, and they tested the air from that, which this scientist did not have.
Mm-hmm.
So he said that's going to be your best ways to test it. So it's kind of like, yeah, well, this is what I found. The chloroform was not that significant in my findings. It was there, but my test wasn't as sensitive. And the fact that all this stuff is removed is also going to lower the levels that you would expect to see. So, so all of these I do feel like have kind of been backfiring on the defense. I felt a bit like they were reaching, trying to like call people to show, see what we found, nothing. See what we found, nothing, and parade all of these witnesses out there. But they really weren't additive, and in
like they
many
didn't
cases,
really help their case,
or they kind of hurt it. But they used that like, why didn't the prosecution call these people? They were trying to hide this stuff. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it probably works on some people, but when it's non-evidence, like why would you waste the jury's time on things that actually don't say anything one way or the other? They don't prove or disprove anything. And they spent a lot of time on that, so that they could pat themselves on the back about, look, we're the ones that are calling them, not the state. Yeah, you're the ones wasting our time. So they did a bunch of that. So none of those, except for Dr. Huntington, who was the forensic entomologist. He was the only one that was effective for me at really thinking about things in a different way. Everyone else, I felt like, really wasn't effective at all. They called the computer guy again, and this is where they kind of pointed out the 83, 84 times. So they call him again to say, aha, do you think you switched things around, did a little switcheroo on the 84 and 2? Possible. That's why you have to kind of like, all right, well, I'm not going to take that piece too seriously, but hey, you only need once. Then they called Cindy and Lee and I'm sure George again. And it was interesting that the first time with the prosecution, Cindy, she could not look at Jose Baez during her testimony. With the prosecution, she was looking at them and answering. But with Jose Baez, she's looking down, and then she'd glance up, down again.
Weird.
And answer and glance down. I was like, she seems very uncomfortable talking to Jose, which is why I thought, and maybe it was the case at the beginning, I don't know, that she was on the side of the prosecution, that she was supporting their case, and so she was uncomfortable talking to her daughter's attorney.
Well, certainly talking about all of the lies that Casey made was not helpful to Casey's case. So if for the whole time she was on Casey's side, she probably wouldn't have talked about all of that.
And when she was talking about all of those lies with the prosecution, she wasn't like, I can't look at the prosecutor while I'm telling the story. She wasn't doing that. So she wasn't uncomfortable sharing them even then. Then you get to this testimony called by the defense, and clearly she's on the side of the defense at this point, and trying to walk back some of the things that she said before. That was interesting to see. He went into basically the family. It was a known lie that they knew she didn't really have a job.
Okay.
Yeah. And this whole, she had this ID from Universal with her name tag, and sometimes the name tags would change. I don't know why it adds to their defense. Fake emails from work that Casey would print out and show to her mom. That
I'm questioning how this helps the defense.
I know. I'm like, okay, I guess it's part of the whole world that she's crafting, that they're showing that this world existed. But I don't know that the fact that she started the lies 2 years earlier actually strengthens her defense now, because what is the motivation for lying 2 years ago about these things, where if you're like, her child died in this traumatic thing and so she crafted this world to live in, I'm like, well, but she's been living in that world for 2 years already, except her daughter was alive, but all this other stuff already she had crafted. So I don't know. The lies about Zanny the nanny had started 2 years prior. There's also the Jeff Hopkins and all these other characters that they were birthed by Casey right around the time she birthed Caylee. So
Okay.
they're all about 2 years old. Oh gosh. So kind of the family dysfunction. Casey's family hid Casey's pregnancy until she was 7.5 months pregnant. She goes to a family wedding in June, and Caylee was born in August. When they were asked, hey, is she pregnant? And oh, no, she's not. She just is retaining water, or something they said about a tumor. At some point in passing said something about a tumor, and I was like, well, a tumor, okay. And also this story from Jose Baez about Casey in July of 2005, so that's like a month or so before she had Caylee, that she comes to visit her mom at work wearing a trench coat, trying to hide the fact she's pregnant for her mom's benefit or whatever. But the co-workers noticed, and 1 week later, Cindy announces the pregnancy in the office, and he's like, it was July, it was hot, and she's wearing this trench coat. Can you imagine? Right? Like, okay, yeah. We already talked about their theory of what happened, that Caylee drowned in the pool, and there was kind of a funny moment when the defense asked if Casey could get out of the house easily. Just like, yes, Casey could. Cindy told co-workers that someone was swimming in her pool, someone left the ladder up and the gate open, and Cindy thought someone came into their yard and swam in their pool, and they were saying that's evidence that Cindy left the ladder on the pool. They swam together the day before she went missing, that she left it on there, and then this was her like, oh, I didn't leave it on there. So she's saying that to her coworkers, and when they first called 911, that within 24 hours, Cindy tells the detectives about the ladder incident, but the police didn't do any follow-up on that. The defense did question George and Cindy about how they would bury their pets. When they would bury their pets, they would place them inside 2 garbage bags and then wrap the garbage bags with duct tape. Mm-hmm. This is the way that they buried their pets, and it matches the same. And Lee, I felt like, even though he refused to talk to the prosecution ahead of trial, he also refused to talk to the defense ahead of trial. He really didn't want to talk to either side, and he was pretty much not trying to defend Casey or trying to...
Just non-committal.
Yeah, he just saying it like he saw it. And I guess the one thing that he did say that supported the defense's case was he had been living in the house when Casey was pregnant, and that he, a couple times, like when she was walking out of the bathroom after she'd gotten ready for bed and they were passing each other in the hallway, that he had noticed, like, whoa, what's that? Mm-hmm. Saw like some sort of baby bump, and she just went, whatever. And that he had brought it up to Cindy, and she said, leave it alone or something. And so he was like, okay, fine. And that he had kind of felt left out of the whole baby planning stuff and was kind of hurt by that. And actually it was interesting that both he cried and Casey cried during that portion. Like after Caylee was born and he visited her at the hospital. I don't know. It just like both of them were really crying during that section of testimony, which I found really interesting.
That is interesting.
And just he said he regretted not being more involved and wanting to be a better uncle and things like that. So that was the only time I really saw him emotional during testimony. So there was also some questioning of some of the law enforcement personnel, basically about somebody handcuffing Casey the night of the 911 call. And as part of the whole, they put her in the back of the car, they handcuffed her, so she didn't feel free to really be honest or truthful or whatever. But it came out that she was handcuffed for a couple minutes, and that it was not about this case. It was about the original report of the theft and the money and whatever. And so he had like, okay, normal procedure would be this. And then the supervisor came out and said, we're not looking into that aspect of the call at all. That's not what's important.
Okay.
She doesn't need to be in handcuffs, and they took him off. So
right, because he was already reporting to the house based on the first 911 call that Cindy made about wanting her daughter arrested for grand theft. So that's all he knew going into it.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
There were a lot of officers there, and so I think he's doing one part and thinking he's doing the thing he's supposed to do, and he's like a patrol officer, not a detective or whatever. And then they're like, no, we're not going to investigate that, so we don't need to worry about that part. So cuffs came off, and she just went back in the house, was doing whatever she was doing. The couple private investigators came and testified, and one of these private detectives had worked for Jose Baez, and then they had a falling out. Then he works for the Anthonys specifically and not with Jose anymore, which was kind of interesting that they would bring that out. So he was investigating different leads that were coming in on tip lines and also security for the family because of all the media presence, trying to discourage the media from harassing them, staying off their property and things like that. Apparently, they went and searched the area of Suburban Drive pretty close to where the body was found. This was a little bit controversial, which it was, but Dominic Casey is one of the PIs, and he says he was on the phone with a psychic. And the psychic told him some places that he should be looking. I mean, it doesn't take a psychic to say, look in the woods right by the house.
I'm getting a feeling.
Wait, I think something.
Like Mean Girls, there's a whatever % chance it is already raining.
Yeah. So the other PI, he is filming Dominic Casey doing some of these searches. So they go somewhere else in the neighborhood, like across the street and down to some abandoned house that they kind of poke around in some flower beds around that house and dig up some stuff and find some piece of garbage bag or something. Yeah, so they go through a whole big thing about where exactly were you parked. There were 2 different days that they went to Suburban Drive, and where were you parked and where did you go and how far did you go? And it did appear that they were further down the road, not significantly, but not right where the body was either. Both of them were kind of like, well, I mean, it was pretty dense. I mean, we did go poke around in there and stuff, but even when Roy Kronk, which we're going to get to shortly, when he leads the police officer into where he found the body, he actually passes it and then like, wait a minute, this seems too far, and then he turns around and, oh, there it is. You could be even looking for it and miss it, but they didn't see anything. And part of the controversial thing was whether it was Cindy that told them to look there or if it was the psychic that told them to look there. And was it that like the family already knew that she was dead and the family knew she was there? The defense said that when they found the body on December 11th, that Cindy made a statement saying, I already had my guys look there and there was no body, something like that. And she says, no, I didn't hire them. I didn't know anything. So I don't know. It's weird. Like, why would it matter either way? You can have your PIs searching that area, but I think the reason that she might have felt like she had to deny that, either it's true that she didn't ask him to, and it was a psychic that she was working with that asked him to, or she thought it made George look suspect or Casey look suspect or something, and so she didn't want to.
If she suggested they search in an area that the body actually was.
Yes, exactly. So it could be that, you know, I don't really know, but yeah, that was a little bit strange that there was kind of that controversy over it. The other thing with the searches is they called Joseph Jordan, who was a volunteer that worked with this organization that does searches. He was the team leader for some of the searches that they did for Caylee, and the defense claimed that they had searched that whole area months prior and that the body wasn't there. So again, they're trying to say the body wasn't there this whole time, but then their actual scientific experts are saying the body was there the whole time. So
what's more likely, you missed it while searching a very large area, or all the scientists are getting it wrong?
Right. And it's just strange. Well, you have these two things that you're trying to say that don't actually match each other at all. But he'd been assigned to take his team and search this area of Suburban Drive. Suburban Drive goes past the elementary school, and then it goes a ways down a road that there's just woods on the sides. And it dead ends. If you were still going straight down the road, there's a little dirt path. They wanted them to search that area. So that was significantly
Further
far,
away.
away from where the body was. And he had a map, and he had actually highlighted the specific areas that they searched, and it showed on the map that they did not search the area where Caylee's body was found, and that the area that was actually along the road that was close to the whole stretch where Caylee's body actually was found on that side of the road, that it was underwater during that time, and they'd gone a little bit to try and go into the woods, but there was water and Florida, alligators, poisonous snakes, and the dense undergrowth. It wasn't safe for them to go any deeper into that area, and so they did not cover that area. The defense, there was some questioning, and I can't remember exactly what the question was, but it seemed innocuous. But he pled the fifth on something, but it didn't seem like anything to do with this search or something. I don't know. Because there was documentation, and the documentation all supported the fact that these are the areas we searched in. The defense wanted to say, there were 70, there were 100, there were like all of these searchers, and it had on that paper the searchers that were in that team, and there were like less than 10 people. So talk about, inflating stuff, right? To be like, yes, and there was no way. It's like, well, we got the names all right here. It shows, and I can show you the area. They searched all over there. Well, actually, here it is. So I don't know.
Why call people to the stand and don't support your defense? It's not like they were called to the stand by the prosecution and you have no choice.
Right. I know, which I do think it's like weird. You call this guy because you want him to tell a certain story, which he's not going to tell, and then you try and smear him so that people don't believe his story.
They were hoping he would tell their story, and then he didn't. And who knows, maybe he said he would, and then he got a conscience, or what? I don't know.
Yeah, it's true. So that was like, okay, well, that was pretty clear. That was one of the things that the defense said they were going to show that they did not show. They didn't show the area had been searched. The closest they got was with those PIs that were actually relatively close to where the body was, but haven't found it. But a super interesting guy is the guy that found the body.
The meter reader himself.
Yes, poor Roy Kronk. I feel like Roy Kronk is like, it's this name that I think is part of urban legend now. I feel like it's a
deja vu right now. I don't know why.
Because Roy Kronk. It's like that name that you have in a cartoon or something.
He kind of reminds me of Kronk from Emperor's New Groove. He just like is kind of this like.
See, maybe that is it. Maybe it's because of Kronk there, but it's just this name that strikes you.
It's almost like an, I don't know, Igor type.
Sorry, Roy.
He doesn't look like an Igor, but I'm just saying like
the sound of the name.
Yeah, and he is just a dopey dude. Like I haven't seen him talk, but just that picture of him.
Yeah.
Older.
Well, so poor Roy. Roy trying to do his civic duty. A little bit of an odd guy, Yeah. Let's just leave it at that. But like one of those harmless odd guys, the sense that I get from him anyway is kind of, but it was a couple months into the search and he got assigned to read the meters in that area, including the Anthony's home. And they would do part of their route, and then they took a break, and they're hanging out. His supervisor was training a new meter reader, and they came to check on Roy and see if he needed any help. So they're hanging out on Suburban Drive, and they're talking and say, man, this would be a great place to hide a body. I mean, of course, the Anthony's, everybody, like, it does not take a rocket scientist, like you said. So Roy goes poking around a little bit in the woods, and I don't know if he was relieving himself or...
15 feet into the woods. It's kind of far if you're just going to pee, but...
Yeah. Well, it's weird estimating distance because his supervisor... Well, how far do you think he went into the woods? I don't know, like maybe 25 feet. Like, that was way into the woods, right. It's like, really? 25 feet? Probably not. And then you'd say, well, did you see such and such? Well, it's so dense, you can't really see into there. Then how did you see him go 25 feet? That's weird. So I think, like any of us, he's just thinking, I don't know, probably, but to me, I think, well, he probably was a lot less than that with how dense those woods were. I'm not sure how far he went into the woods that day, but he comes out and says, I saw something white that looks like maybe it's a skull. He says, I didn't know if it was a real skull or just a prop skull or something that kind of resembled a skull. I wasn't really sure, but he came out kind of about it, and they're like, oh, what? And they're gonna go see it, and then they come across this big old rattlesnake that was dead, and they're like, oh my gosh, this rattlesnake, oh, and they get all caught up in looking at this rattlesnake, taking pictures with it, whatever, So they kind of, what skulls? They forget about it, they go back to their office, and nothing else is ever said about it, but that night, Roy calls the non-emergency line, and just said, hey, I saw something, kind of described it on Suburban Drive. It looked like, I'm not saying it was a skull, but it was white. It looked like it could be a skull. And that tip was passed along, and Yuri Melich said, we've already searched that area.
So unfortunate.
I know. It's so unfortunate. And also for poor Roy, who gets thrown under the bus, right? So he calls again to follow up because nothing, right? So he's like, And so they do agree, well, hey, can you go meet an officer out there and kind of show him where you saw it? So I think there's 3 calls in pretty close succession, where the third is where he says, hey, I'm out here to meet the sheriff's officer. I'm here now. And the deputy gets out there and steps into the woods and kind of glances around and doesn't notice anything. And he comes back and just, according to Roy, lays into him for wasting their time and whatever. And so he's kind of like, okay, I'm not
going to call again.
Yeah. He says 30 minutes. He's just chewing him out, and I know some cops that, I've seen it. I've heard it. But he kind of gets scolded, and so he leaves. And then it's December 11th. He gets put back on that same route again, and he stops by his regular pit stop for his potty break and walks into the woods. There's a couple gaps in the trees that are the most likely places where you're going to go if you're going to walk into the woods a little bit. And one of those was, the path that was taken to take Caylee's body into the woods. And so it makes sense that if people are going to walk into the woods, they're going to walk close by it, right? You know, so he does walk in there and, whoa, sees the skull. So instead of calling the police this time, though, because of his history with them just not taking him seriously, he calls his supervisor. And then his supervisor, I think, calls someone else in their company, and then they call the police, and they connect him with the supervisor.
And it's at this point that he kind of lifts up the skull with a stick, because he's like, hey, I'm going to call again. I want to be sure that it doesn't just look like a skull. No, it is.
Right. So he's more shaken up this time than he was before. Was kind of like, I saw something that maybe was. I couldn't really see it very well. I didn't go very far in there, but I kind of saw something. But this time he's like, oh my gosh, that is a skull. So he's the whole guy that tormented the Anthonys for months on end when the body could have been found if he'd only done his duty and let the police know, which he did.
Right.
And
you would think, especially with that case going on that close to the home, even if they'd already searched that area or thought they had, be like, hey, you know what? Somebody thinks they saw this. Look. Show me. Let me look at the thing that you think is a skull. And I'll look at it and be like, hey, you know what? It's a rock. It's so weird. I'm sure they get tips all the time with that high profile of a case. I know they're getting tips. We see a girl that looks like Caylee in California, in Texas, blah, blah, blah. But this is different. I see what looks like maybe a dead body, and it is so close to their house. That's really hard if you say, I think I saw a live little girl that maybe looks like Caylee. Okay, but this you can easily verify or disprove.
True. And I don't know I can't remember what month.
August 11th and 12th. And you see
it's like a month, 2 months now. It's been 2 months since she was
But 1 month since it's been all over the news. You think, 2 months since she's died, there had to have been way more evidence on that body until December. That's a long time,
I know. I mean, really, who should be feeling bad are the cops.
That didn't take it seriously, didn't find it.
Yes, and I do have to say, though, that you already mentioned they're getting thousands and thousands and thousands of tips, but it's also right around the corner from the house.
Yeah.
So, you know.
And I have to say, if there had been a tip out there that they found a little girl that maybe looked like Caylee and they didn't go and investigate it and it turned out it really was her and then she died later, we'd be mad about that too.
Yeah.
So there's a lot they have to do. But like I said, this one would have been so easy to verify or disprove. Just go out and do it. Yes, you're busy, but it would have taken less time than the allegedly 30 minutes you took chewing this guy up.
Right.
You know?
Right. Like,
just
you
go
walk
in
in
and
there and go see it. I'll show you where it is, and then you go look at it, you know? His coworkers said, yeah, after that one day, he never said anything about it again. He didn't mention that he called the police about it. Just, you know, life went on per usual. At that point, he wasn't sure of what he saw. He'd already said something to him about it, and why would he keep bugging them about it?
Right.
He told the people he should have told about it. When he called, they actually said, you need to call the tip line.
He's like, well, maybe it has nothing to do with her. Maybe it's something else.
And they're like, well, you need to call the tip line because that's the way it works. Okay, so he calls the tip line.
Overwhelmed.
And there were definitely things about his testimony that, you know, he made stuff up. He embellished. It's a fishtail where the fish keeps getting bigger every time you tell the story, where he said, oh, I picked up a garbage bag and the skull rolled out of it. And, you know, obviously that didn't happen, but it sounds way more exciting.
Right.
You know?
It's his little short time in the spotlight over here.
Yeah, so I mean, I did feel like, okay, he made some choices that didn't look very good for him as far as the story that he was telling about finding it, but there wasn't anything nefarious about the reports. Because when I first heard, like, oh, this person called 911 4 times to report the body, that seems strange.
Right.
You know, but when I realized that the first ones were all related to that first time that he saw it and he's following up, that actually, you know, it's not like over and over, like, hey, so I found, you know, like some other thing on some other location or some other whatever that he's saying, or just, he's saying, I called yesterday about this and they told me to call the tip line. So it doesn't.
Called about it, didn't really hear what happened,
Yeah.
called again. He said, I'll come do this, and, you know,
Right.
and that's it. So,
And then it's like months later, he's back in the area and voila, he finds it, you know. I mean, voila, he put back the skull that he took and taped and then had out in his backyard or something to disintegrate the tape. I don't know, whatever. He's not that smart. Let's just say he is not gonna handle that. He's not gonna set that up just right.
He kind of fits his name.
The defense wanted to say that he knew where her remains were for months, that he had quote unquote control over her remains and hid her. There's this reward out there, $225,000, and he thought, I'm going to be rich. And all these people that were involved in the searches, psychics, PIs, bounty hunters, search volunteers, police, blah, blah, blah. And they never found anything. Doing all those searches, they didn't find anything until December, which to them says the body wasn't there until right before Roy Kronk found it in December. But the thing that did kind of look bad for him was they called his son. His dad had told him, I'm going to be famous. I'm going to be rich. I found this body and I'm going to be on TV. He's trying to place when it was that they had this conversation. Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, but it also doesn't equal for me that he had the remains stashed in the trunk of his car, and then he put it out there so that he... And if he really needed the money, you would make sure that somebody else didn't find it. Whatever.
Right away. They were offering rewards right away, so it's not like you're waiting, hoping the pot gets sweeter or something.
Right. Yeah. That to me was kind of like, I don't
know.
Like
he
it
have
might
the
be
body
a bigger deal.
because he found it and took it, or did he kill her? Because if he killed her, how did you get all this stuff from inside the house?
No, it doesn't add up. And all of the experts saying the body was not moved after it was put there a couple days after she died. So he did not take the body. Could he have taken the skull? In theory, yes, he could have taken the skull, but why? And the whole theory about the duct tape, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. I mean, could you see someone saying, oh my gosh, I want to show people his skull. Look at how cool. But nobody came forward and said, yeah, he came and showed us this skull. That's the thing that would have been damning. Right. But the only thing that would have been damning about it is the fact that, dude, why did you pick up the skull and take it with you? You should have just called the cops.
Right.
It doesn't make you you the killer.
Right, exactly.
You know, it sounds like a little kid that would be like, oh my gosh, this is so cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. Another interesting person that testified was a grief specialist and speaks everywhere, does all this teaching, training, working with people, grieving, and all of that. So a credible witness, unfortunately for the defense. But when the defense is questioning her, they present like this hypothetical situation of...
That's very obvious what's actually happening.
This is, let's say that we have a 22-year-old and blah, 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 and her daughter has died in a swimming pool, and she's going to bars and she's going shopping. Is that something that you might expect? And she says, yeah, that can happen. People do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's not uncommon, especially that age group, that they might act in these ways.
Coping.
Yeah, obviously not everybody's going to, but grief looks different on everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, yeah, there's no one way that grief is going to look, and you can't judge someone else's grief, right?
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately then the prosecution comes up and they say, oh, you want to play that game about presenting a hypothetical? Let's present a hypothetical to you. How about this and this and this and 31 days and you're lying about this and the cops come and then you continue to lie and you made up all these people, and I can't remember all the details that they put in there. And as they're going on and on about the hypothetical, her expressions on her face are like, you know, like, wait a minute, this is bizarre, because they ask, well, what do you know about the case? Nothing. She knows nothing about it. She's just there to say grief can look different. I could tell you that.
Right.
You know? Right. So, you know, and then she's kind of like, okay, you know, I mean, she didn't say impossible, it couldn't look like that, but it was like, well, that is a very strange situation. It kind of showed to me that that was an outlier of all outliers and not anywhere in the realm of a normal grieving process or even a dysfunctional grieving process, right? This is beyond the pale. And then one final defense witness before the rebuttal case by the prosecution was Crystal Holloway. So this is River Cruz is the way that she was known to George and Cindy Anthony. She had volunteered with the search for Caylee, putting out flyers and stuff like that, and had gotten to be friends with them. And George says this is one of the places he did not shine on the witness stand. We were just friends. She had cancer, so I was going over to her apartment to console her without my wife at night. Or whatever, no.
Right.
I don't know. They didn't really say what time of day, so I just threw that in. Sorry. I should... Please ignore that if you're on the jury. Don't listen to that.
Cannot be used.
Strike.
Cannot be considered.
Anyway, but he says they did not have an affair. She says they did have an affair, that it was sexual in nature, that they had a falling out because she went to a vigil and Cindy was there, George was there, and she felt like George didn't really acknowledge her.
Weird. Why not? Why not acknowledge your mistress with your
Mm-hmm.
wife there?
Yeah. But she says during the time before the body was found, maybe in November or something, that he was over there, they're drinking, whatever, talking, and he got emotional. Oh, I just can't see you raising a child who would do something like that. And basically the statement came out of like, that it's just this tragic situation or whatever that snowballed out of control. And I feel like that doesn't mean
I'm involved.
that I knew she was dead and this whole thing snowballed out of control. Look at Casey. You don't think that snowballed out of control?
Mm-hmm.
Like her lies and everything, which I think is exactly like the story you were telling about yourself.
Right.
Here's something that happened and then just things kind of snowballed out of control.
Totally.
But it started with
Lies get lies.
you
Get
killed
lies.
your daughter. That's where it started. So I don't know that it has to mean what it could sound like it means. It could be.
He might be saying, well, I don't think that she killed her, but I think maybe there was an accident and it snowballed out of control. Him theorizing what he thinks maybe happened.
I can't say like what it did mean if he said it, but there's nothing with the evidence presented that supports at all George being involved in the death and cover up like, disposing of Caylee's body. There's no evidence that's been presented at all that supports that beyond this vague idea of maybe he knew where the car was and maybe he took it to somehow, but not in the right time frame. And, oh, he made this one comment and he put duct tape on a gas can. He called the cops. Yeah. It's like very tenuous connections and nothing that says that at all. That's pretty much the defense's case. They try to smear the PI a little bit, the Dominic Casey that had the falling out with Jose. I wonder why. They're like, we obviously hate each other. Smear, smear, smear. But I don't know. But then we had just a few rebuttal witnesses that actually were pretty powerful rebuttal witnesses and kind of turned the tide for me. So 2 from Cindy's work. The one niggling thing that I said about the search, that maybe it really could have been Cindy. How much it matters, I don't know, but maybe, it was Cindy. Their compliance officer, after Cindy got up and testified that they went and requested this information, and he came and it shows that Cindy was logged in to her work computer, actively making changes in patient files during the times that those searches were made, both days. And this is a system that is an isolated system. You can't access it anywhere but at work. Back in 2008, they did that. I don't know if they still do that anymore anywhere.
Maybe some that are really high security.
Right. She worked for Gentiva Healthcare, which is the largest home health provider in the nation, or was at the time. You can't log on from anywhere but at the office, and it shows what machine you're on too. And it was the computer in her office. So it's not like, well, maybe I somehow made it work from somewhere else, but it also has the tag of your computer in your office. So she did not make those searches. 100%. She was working and did not do those searches. And her supervisor also said, we don't change time cards. Yeah, they don't have to be there because she's salary. The hours don't matter so much, but we're not going to falsify,
right?
They're
going to say she worked that day, she didn't.
So that kind of blew that out of the water. Dr. Warren did come back. He was the forensic anthropologist that had talked about the duct tape placement and why the skull and jaw were kept in place. So he comes back because Dr. Spitz has gone on there and said, protocol that we open the skull, and he says, no, actually the protocol, and he had documentation of...
He had the receipts.
Yes, exactly. You do not open the skull in skeletonized remains, especially on pediatric subjects. Instead, a mirror or a camera is inserted through the large hole in the bottom. That you look around in there. And of course, if you found something that needed closer examination, then yeah, you would open the skull.
Right.
But one of the reasons that you don't open the skull on a child is because, well, in a skeletonized state, you can actually crack the skull itself because it's really fragile. And Dr. Spitz actually did break the skull when he sawed it open. So, they had photographs showing like, hey, before, after, we see it was not broken. Now it's broken. Not only are you wrong, but the very reason why you don't open the skull
happened.
Yeah, it happened when you did it. And the doctor that was involved in actually inspecting the skull, they did a saline wash inside of the skull and tested that for elements of decomposition, and there were none. So, blew that out of the water too, that what he was 100% is decomposition, and that proves that the skull was in a certain position, was not that, and was something else like, oh, what? Swamp water coming in and out and leaving residue inside the skull as it's doing whatever it's doing? Okay. Yeah. And then finally, Detective Yuri Melich, he comes, and because Cindy doubled down on the day that the ladder was left, she found it left on the pool and the side gate open was the 16th. That's what she wanted to say. I'm sure it was the 16th. So she wanted to support this idea of an accidental drowning. And I called George and I told him about it on that day. So they went back, checked the call logs, and said neither the house phone or Cindy's cell phone called George's phone on the 16th, or his work phone. So she didn't call his cell phone. The defense said, well, but he had another work cell phone. But she always said that she would sometimes call him on his work cell phone if he didn't answer his cell phone,
right,
which she didn't have a first call to the cell phone. So there was nothing that supported that she was trying to call him on that day.
I mean, and if they looked at her phone records, it would show that she didn't call another additional work phone. If they looked at his phone, okay, maybe it wouldn't show if she tried to call that one. But,
But yeah, you're right. If they're looking at her records, they know what calls she made on the 16th and could call all of those. They could figure out who all of those belonged to.
Yep.
And so that blows out of the water the idea of the ladder, it being that day that it was left up and that's support for Caylee having drowned.
Yep.
So, and that brings us to the end, which is really just both sides make their closing argument and sum up their case, which they probably spent just as much time summing up their case as I did telling you the whole case over this past 3 episodes. But, you know, where I landed, I think you can guess by what I've been saying. But I really did not make a decision while I was listening. Okay, I'm going to wait because I know the prosecution, they have the advantage that they are presenting first. So they get to tell their story first. And that's a strong position to be in. Oftentimes the defense just rests without even putting on a case at all. They say they have the burden of proof and they didn't prove it, but they did put on a case and it was a weak one. And they would have been better off, I think, had they not called a lot of those witnesses. If they had just called their bug guy and maybe their grief person or something. Like, I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that...
They could have just said in an opening statement, like they did with so many other things, and not even tried to prove that, well, the area was searched beforehand, but then they call people and it ended up proving that the area was not searched beforehand.
Yes, exactly.
So they called people that ended up hurting their own defense.
Yep.
Yet somehow the jury still comes back with an acquittal.
It blows my mind. I feel like the reason that happened is that Jose Baez convinced them that if they didn't know exactly how she was killed, like how she died, that was reasonable doubt. In and of itself. And I have noticed in the cases that I've been watching recently that the defense attorneys like to say it needs to be proved beyond any and all reasonable doubt. You know, it's kind of like any doubt, all doubt, and minimizing the reasonable part of it. Well, yeah, but that does say it does have to be reasonable. And the judge does say there's never a situation that you're going to have no doubt.
Right.
Because we weren't there. We don't know. I think when you're dealing with a case like this that is so serious and you're dealing with a death penalty case, you should take it seriously as a juror. This really matters. And I could see the fact that these were skeletal remains made it hard on the jury.
I'm so sad they didn't get those remains back in August.
I know.
When they were first discovered.
I know. Really, what it came down to for me was talking through, okay, what if this was an accident, but it just never would add up?
The behavior after the fact doesn't add up to an accident.
And the duct tape was the clincher, really. There's just no other explanation for it. Everything fits with, there was a body in that trunk. It was Caylee's body. One of her hairs was left there. She's wearing the clothes. The laundry hamper that she's in is sold in a set of 2. They have the one short square one, the tall rectangular one missing. The tags of those 2, the one found with her remains and the one in the house, they match each other. The
blanket from inside the house.
The blanket from inside the house. The duct tape that is a rare duct tape that very limited numbers of rolls were produced and sold and hasn't been sold for years at this point. I just really, and like we said before, why would you ever make an accident look like a murder? It doesn't make any sense. And if she did die by accident, why would there ever be duct tape on her face? It does not make sense. So everything lines up. I didn't want to believe that she could actually do that to her child. But at this point, with what was presented in trial, my verdict is guilty of first-degree murder.
So this jury is not hung because I agree with you.
Well, let's see. Maybe I'm going to change my mind. When you give me your information, maybe that'll sway me in a way that I didn't expect. And I don't want to be so set that I refuse to look at other information and take that into consideration and see. So,
yep, I'll be excited to get into it. Until then,
I'm Christy.
I'm Maryn.
And court is adjourned.